Hi, welcome back. Today I'd like to talk to you about the shadow. So by shadow here I'm referring to Carl Jung, the Swiss psychotherapist and psychiatrist, the follower of or studied under Freud. So that's my general framework that I'm working from here. Basically the shadow is the part of our psyche that for whatever reason we find too difficult to own and therefore see as not part of us. So what happens in our lives is as we experience trauma, and trauma is unavoidable going through a human life. There's a fantastic book on that called The Trauma of Everyday Life by Mark Epstein, who's a psychotherapist and psychiatrist and also a practicing Buddhist. And he looks at how meditation, the traditional practices of meditation in Buddhism and the models of psychotherapy help us to understand trauma, the shadow, and how we can reintegrate these parts of ourselves. So essentially, we may have, for example, received the message in childhood that to be angry was to be evil or bad. And so therefore, when we have extreme experiences of anger, the part of our psyche that is connected with anger is blocked off to us. We have pushed the extreme, or sometimes not even extreme, but the experience of anger into the shadow. It's cleaved from our conscious experience, and so we experience anger not as our own anger, but out there in the world. So we may say, why is it that I see so many angry people? And so on. And others may see us as being angry and but not owning that. So this is a basic, quick synopsis of the shadow. And again, it's a very human, it's a very common part of humanity. We all have it. It's impossible to avoid having trauma. The question is, how do we reintegrate these parts of ourselves that have been pushed off into that part of our psyche? So there are lots of practices. Again, in the Epstein book, he speaks very eloquently about how the modern understanding of how trauma is healed is that we re-experience the intensity of those experiences that we could not stand or we felt. And especially you can imagine if a small child experiences something incredibly intense, the feeling that we cannot survive it. And so in order to protect ourselves from something that is perceived as something that's going to wipe us out, it gets pushed into the shadow. And that through psychotherapy and through practices like meditation, which create a sense of security and safety, either through the sense of calm that's developed through a strong meditation practice or through the relationship with a skilled psychotherapist, we are able to re-experience that intensity and be conscious of the fact that we actually can survive it. And then through that experience, the trauma is healed, that part of ourself is reintegrated and becomes part of our consciousness, our conscious mind. So why is this important? Well, for one, just as a human being, the amount of time that we spend in unconscious reactive patterns is really remarkable. They say that we go through our day, upwards of 80% for most of us of our day is spent in habits, which are unconscious. And now some of those habits will be determined by our shadow, since our shadow is at play directing us unconsciously. And so you can imagine that if we are unable to face or experience certain things, that we're going to be either the quality of our life is going to be diminished, or we're going to be in conflict more often. So we're going to be in a situation where somebody is sensing our anger and is trying to address it, but we honestly do not see it as ours, and so we are unable to do that. And you can imagine in a relationship with a partner or any other situation that can be quite problematic. So as a teacher, why is this important? Well, as teachers, we bring our whole self to our relationship with our students, our colleagues, the parents, in our community and our administrators. And so you can imagine this is going to be playing out in every one of those relationships. The part where it becomes more problematic in terms of doing our job is that our shadow is going to be running its programming in terms of how we address our students. So if we have an unconscious bias towards a certain gender or ethnicity or sexual orientation or religion, or maybe just somebody who has a certain eye color because we have associations in our childhood with somebody who affected us in a negative way. It really can take any form. The point being here that we're going to be playing that out and affecting the students that we have as our charges, and we're going to be doing it unconsciously. We can have the greatest, most compassionate intention in the world to do right by our students, but if we are not aware of the bias that we hold, we're going to be doing harm, and none of us wants to be doing that. So part of our responsibility as a reflective, caring, compassionate teacher, professional, is to ask the question, what bias might be operating in me? And we need to be brave here. We need to show courage, because it is scary to ask a question, am I unintentionally doing any harm? Am I unintentionally creating a situation where I believe certain students are going to succeed and certain students are not, and then my behavior is basically making that a foregone conclusion? So it's a very big body of work, and it's also a very almost magical one as we do the work on ourselves of looking at our trauma, looking at potential bias, really becoming more and more self-aware. We gain greater and greater degrees of freedom in our whole life, not just at work. And so since teaching, it's hard to imagine a profession where we bring our whole self to the job more than teaching. I'm sure there are other fields that this is also true, but I'm sure that there's no field that is more true. That as we bring our whole self to our job, to doing the best for our students, this is an integral part of our responsibility. Because no matter how hard we're working, no matter how many workshops we take, no matter how many best practices we attempt to implement, if we are not addressing our shadow, if we are not looking at how it may be playing out in our lives, it's going to be constantly undermining any attempt we make to be more equitable, to be to have a more enlightened view of how to work with our students. So it's a very brief introduction and an invitation, if you haven't already started that work, to do so. And if you have started that work, that you're not alone, that there are a lot of us who feel that responsibility and who recognize that by undertaking this work, we're not just benefiting our students, the parents that are in our community, our colleagues, and our administration, we're impacting everyone who has contact with us in our lives, our loved ones, the people in our community, and it just ripples out more and more from there. So look forward to exploring these ideas more in the future. Great to see you today, and we'll see you next time.